Hey, what is going on, guys? And in this video, I'm going to talk about two specific stocks that I currently have positions in and sort of walk through why I'm bullish on these two particular equities. So the first up is Ping Identity. And so Ping Identity is in the cybersecurity space, but more specifically, the niche is called IAM. And in cybersecurity space, that acronym stands for Identity and Access Management. For those of you who don't know what that is, I won't get super technical, but in essence, identity and access management is, you can think of a company like Okta that also competes in this space, and I think it's growing exponentially, and I think it'll continue to grow because as we move into a post-COVID environment, even from pre-COVID, we are moving into a more distributed workforce, right? So more employees are not sitting on premise. They're out in the field, and even sometimes they're global, right? So that means that you have tons of endpoints out in the field. You have tons of employees that are trying to sign on to a Salesforce or an Outreach or a ZoomInfo or whatever sort of programs you use in your day-to-day business. You don't want to have your employees memorize all of that, all those passwords and usernames, right? It would be more efficient to have your employees verify once or sign on or an SSO and the company be able to know that the employee is actually who they say they are. So in essence, they can have access to all of their CRM applications, and they can do it remotely, and they can do it in a way where the company knows that you're the employee and you're not pretending to be somebody you aren't, right? So identity and access management. So you identify first, you verify, and you can have your employees have a seamless experience, and you can access pretty much anything you need to in terms of your internal infrastructure. So a couple of things that IAM, or Identity and Access Management, wants to address, right? And so I work in IT consulting. I sell software and a bunch of different SaaS products. And a lot of times when I'm sitting down with chief technology officers, they always ask me about, what is sort of a platform management solution or a password management solution we could deploy. We want to alleviate our identity silos, or we want to secure our APIs, and even regulatory compliance. So a lot of times I sell into hospitals, nursing homes, and home healthcare agencies that need to be in HIPAA compliance. So when I'm in real life, when I'm talking to all of these different chief technology officers and CEOs, these are sort of the questions they're asking me all the time. So I sort of try to spin that into an investment thesis and understand, okay, well, what companies out there can actually solve the problems of the business owners that I talk to every single day? And so one of those is Ping Identity. One of the reasons why I like this particular company, it focuses in the IAM space, but it was actually brought public by Vista Equity Partners. And you guys can do your own research on that. But this is a great company. It has a great CEO. Andre Durand is a very reputable person in the cybersecurity space. It's a little bit lacking on their revenue growth, but I think once they get a couple quarters under their belt where they transition from a hybrid environment. So they like to sell into companies that are still using on-premise infrastructure. But I think as they just totally shift to the cloud and push their employees to shift to the cloud, I think they'll get more subscription rates. They'll onboard more customers, and so on. So another thing I like about this stock is the number of funds, or the institutions, are growing quarter over quarter. So that means all the top mutual funds, you want to look for institutional sponsorship in your names. So for example, in March 2020, there were about 158 mutual funds that owned Ping Identity. That's almost double to 269. So that means all of these different equity analysts and equity research analysts at these big mutual funds are doing research into the company. They like it. They like the investment thesis. So they're actually allocating capital to this particular stock. The next one, if we go up here, MarketSmith, I briefly talked about it before. Ticker symbol is OKTA, and that's Okta. So it's also another competitor in the identity and access management space. So again, this is all about authenticating your workers. I would strongly suggest you guys do a deep dive on the inner workings of cybersecurity and the different products and services that are really hot in the marketplace right now. I would also look at some companies like a Zscaler or a CrowdStrike, which I'm also bullish on. But currently, my two largest cybersecurity positions right now would have to be Okta is my number one, Ping Identity is second, and Zscaler is the third. And one of the reasons why I like Okta over Ping Identity is because their revenue growth is increasing at an exponential rate, essentially. So if you look at Ping Identity's revenue and you look at Okta's revenue, it's almost double, right? So, and they're just beginning to get a couple profitable quarters under their belt. Their institutional sponsorship is phenomenal, with over 1,300 of the best growth stock mutual funds investing into this company. So what I like to look for, again, I follow Bill O'Neill and Investors Business Daily, and they like to look for increasing sales, so 25% plus quarter over quarter, and increasing EPS growth quarter over quarter, at least 20% or more, as well as institutional sponsorship. So if we see over here, we could actually look at some of the top mutual funds in terms of performance that are investing into Okta. So the one I like in particular is Fidelity Contra Fund. So if you think about it, Fidelity Contra, let's go all the way back to when, a big manager used to run that, Peter Lynch, right? So it's a reputable fund that manages billions of dollars. So if, let's say, for example, another fund in Fidelity Growth, let's rip 100,000 shares or whatever, just an example, that there's going to be more institutional buyers to step in and put a floor under that price. I never want to buy a stock that doesn't have good institutional sponsorship, because if a big whale lets rip like 500, 1,000 or 5,000 shares, that price, there's going to be no one to support that price. But if you look at big companies like an Amazon or an Apple, if one of these mutual funds liquidates their entire position, well, there's probably going to be a lot of mutual funds that are going to come in and put a floor under that price. So that's just one of the reasons. So if we go over to TradingView, we'll do some quick technical analysis just to look at the health of the chart. And what I like to look for is always start with a weekly chart, right? For me, I'm an investor for the long term. I want at least 3 to 6 earning cycles before I liquidate a position. And the reason for that is because there's been studies done that if you can buy a good growth stock, and you can sit and park and don't touch that position for at least 3 to 6 beat and raise quarters, which means that the company reports earnings, they beat their earnings, and they also raise their forward guidance and they raise their estimates for the quarter or the year, that stock is going to go up at least 100%, right? 50 to 100%. You want to be able to develop huge positions in these companies, acquire a ton of shares over time, and you want to hold for at least 3 to 6 beat and raise quarters. So if we look here, look at the 50-week moving average, we usually tend to find that every time the price goes back or reverts to the mean at the 50-week moving average, that's usually when big institutional investors add to their positions. So for example, that happened here during the coronavirus crash. We saw price action come back to that 50-week moving average and a ton of buy volume coming in here. And those were institutional investors adding to their existing positions and even starting new positions. And even during this little bit of a growth stock sell-off that we had that began in February and essentially lasted all throughout the winter, we saw price decrease as much as 35%. But again, it came back and found a floor at that 50-week moving average, which essentially is where big institutional investors use to add to their positions. So if we go on a daily here, which I really don't like to use, institutional investors tend to add to their positions on a 50-week moving average, or in other words, the 200-day moving average. So this looks like a very, very healthy chart. It's forming what's called a cup pattern. So what I'm looking for is price action to come up to this level, about the 290, and form a little bit of a handle, right? Usually on a breakout, the stock doesn't just blow right through this area of resistance here. It usually forms a little bit of a handle so it can shake out some of the weaker hands, and then you'll see that price action trend up again. So I'm currently holding my position in Okta. I'm currently holding my position in Ping Identity. One of the other things I like to look for is how dovish the Federal Reserve is being. And Chairman Jerome Powell, he's pretty much telegraphed to the market that he's going to put a floor under this market and support the economy in any way he can. And when the Federal Reserve Chair ever says that I'm going to do everything I can to support the economy, it's pretty much a direct translation means he's going to do everything he can to keep this stock market propped up. So I like to look for the Federal Reserve balance sheet. Are they expanding or are they contracting? And it's just pretty much been a straight line to the moon ever since the coronavirus pandemic. So Okta is one of the names I like. Ping Identity is another. I'm going to wrap this video up here, guys. Even though that this Ping Identity chart doesn't look as clean or as concise, what I'm seeing is Ping Identity going through something called the life cycle of the trade. And if you guys know an investor named Kathy Donnelly, she's wrote an entire book about the life cycle of a new IPO. It'll usually go on a run about 100%. It'll usually do a full retrace and undercut this bottom. And then it'll form a base where institutional investors do their research. You usually let at least 3 to 6 earnings cycles come out so we can see the quarterly results, maybe even wait a full year to see the annual results of a company, and just to really understand if this business is growing and if it's investable. And then if you start to see big institutional sponsorship step in and you see price sort of consolidating and coiling, that's when you get that big markup. Right? So it's not going to be automatic. Sometimes it takes time. And that's why I'm not a day trader. That's why I don't try to sit in front of my computer all day and undercut that 5-minute bar. What I like to look for is solid companies with unbelievable growth potential. So their EPS is growing at least 25% plus quarter over quarter. Your revenues are growing at least 25% quarter over quarter. And during the time that the company is going through its basing period, or essentially the price is moving sideways, I want to see that institutional sponsorship every single quarter going up. You don't want to see that falling down. So in Ping Identity's case, if you look back to September 2019, only 81 funds or mutual funds of the top mutual funds were owning this particular stock. Right? Now that's grown all the way to 269. That means all of these equity research analysts are doing a deep dive in the company. They've presented their investment thesis to their managing director or portfolio manager, and they've considered and allocated capital to this particular security. So these are the 2 stocks I'm currently in the cybersecurity space. Let me know what you guys think. That was a quick video, and for all of those asking me on Twitter, what sort of platform do I use for my stock and securities analysis? And that would be MarketSmith by Investors Business Daily. So if you like this video, guys, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.